I need to write a 5,000-word story in American English, first-person, male narrator over 60. Let me first check the used names file to avoid them. Then craft a story. The band names are Theodore/Ted Whitfield, Brandon, Sloan, Margaret Devereaux, Hollis, Reggie, Earl, Janet, Walter Pemberton, Howard, Caroline, Garrett, Gerald Hollister, Vivienne, Nora, Caleb Hartwell, Declan Prescott, Raymond Aldrich, Liam, Paige, Frank, Arthur Klein, Iris, Elliot, June, Conrad, Miriam, Serena, Griffin, Edwin Garrison Holloway, Clayton, Travis, Delphine Hargrave, Russell Bennett, Eleanor, Nathaniel, Tessa, Walter Hayes, Lily, Brennan, Cordelia, Douglas, Marcus, Preston, Ainsley, Vernon Aldgate, Addie, Miles, Sterling. I'll use Leonard, narrator 63, Diane, wife, Cora, daughter, Owen, fiancé Villain, Joel, son, adopted. Setting, suburban Ohio. The plot twist. Joel is adopted but discovers that Diane had a secret. She was still legally married to someone else when she married Leonard. Bigamy, meaning Leonard and Diane's marriage may be invalid. This avoids the hiding pregnancy logic hole entirely. Let me write the full story now. I still remember the exact weight of the air that morning. Heavy. The kind of heavy that presses on your chest before a storm rolls in off Lake Erie, when the sky turns that particular shade of gray-green and everything goes quiet. I've lived in Millbrook, Ohio my whole life, 63 years. I know what that sky means. I just didn't know it could happen inside a house. It was a Tuesday, 7 weeks before my daughter Cora's wedding. I'd left for my usual walk at 6:15, 40 minutes around the neighborhood, same route I've done since my cardiologist told me 4 years ago that I needed to move more and eat less of the things I love. I walked past the Hendersons' place with the broken mailbox they've never fixed, past the park where Cora used to beg me to push her on the swings, past the 7-Eleven where I sometimes stop for a coffee I'm not supposed to have. That morning, I didn't stop. I came home a little earlier than usual because my left knee was aching and the wind had picked up cold. The front door was unlocked, which wasn't unusual. Diane sometimes forgot. I came in through the side entrance, the one off the garage, because I didn't want to track mud through the front hallway. I set my keys on the hook. I took off my jacket. I could hear voices in the kitchen, low, close together, the kind of voices people use when they don't want to be heard. I almost called out. I don't know why I didn't. Some instinct. Some older, quieter part of me that already knew. I pushed the kitchen door open. Diane had her hands on Owen's face. His hands were at her waist. They were kissing the way you don't kiss someone by accident. I stood there for what felt like a long time. Long enough that the refrigerator clicked and hummed and the clock on the microwave changed from 6,051 to 6,052. Long enough that I understood exactly what I was seeing and could not find a single word for it. Owen Rafferty, 29 years old, my daughter's fiancé. The man who had sat at my kitchen table at Thanksgiving and called me "sir" and shaken my hand with both of his and told me he loved Cora more than anything in the world. Diane heard me first. She pulled back and turned around, and the expression on her face. I've spent months trying to describe it to myself, and the closest I can get is this. It wasn't guilt. It was calculation. She was already thinking about what to say before she even saw my face. I turned around and walked back to the garage. I sat down on an overturned milk crate next to my old workbench, and I put my hands on my knees and I breathed. In and out. In and out. Like my cardiologist told me. Like I'd been practicing for 4 years without knowing why. I heard the front door close. Owen leaving. I heard Diane's footsteps on the kitchen floor, stopping at the doorway to the garage, then retreating. She didn't come out to me. She went upstairs. I sat on that crate for 45 minutes. Then I got up, got in my truck, and drove to my son Joel's apartment on the other side of town. Joel is 26, We adopted him when he was 3 after years of trying and 2 devastating losses that Diane and I never talked about with anyone outside this house. Joel came to us through the county system, a quiet little boy with enormous dark eyes who used to line up his toy cars in perfectly straight rows on the living room floor. He grew into a quiet young man who lines up his arguments the same way, methodically, carefully, making sure everything is in order before he says a word. He opened the door before I could knock. He must have seen my truck pull up. "Dad," he looked at my face. "Come in." I told him what I saw. I told him plainly, without dressing it up or softening the edges. Joel sat across from me at his little kitchen table, the same table I'd helped him carry up 3 flights of stairs 2 years ago. And he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he didn't say, "Are you sure?" or "Maybe it wasn't what it looked like." He just nodded slowly, the way he does when he's processing something. Then he said, "Dad, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me before you react." I told him to go ahead. "I've known something was wrong for a while," he said. "Not about Owen specifically, about Mom." He'd noticed it 6 months ago, he told me. A piece of mail that came to the house when he was visiting. He'd been there to help me fix the gutters, and Diane had come out of nowhere and taken it from the kitchen counter before he could see it clearly, but he'd already caught the return address. A law office in Dayton. He hadn't said anything to me then because he wasn't sure it meant anything. But then he'd started paying attention. There were phone calls she took outside, walking to the end of the driveway. There was an overnight trip she told me was a women's retreat with her church group. But when Joel had driven past the church that weekend, the parking lot was empty, and the sign out front announced that the next retreat was in March. That trip had been in October. "I didn't know how to bring it up to you," Joel said. He was looking at his hands. "I kept telling myself I was probably wrong, that there was an explanation. But after what you just told me," he looked up, "I think we need to find out what's in those letters. I want to be clear about something. I am not a suspicious man by nature. I have spent 40 years as a civil engineer, a profession that rewards patience and methodical thinking over gut reaction. I did not make assumptions without evidence. I was not looking for a reason to tear my marriage apart, but I also know the difference between a foundation that's solid and one that's been compromised somewhere underneath. You can't always see the problem from the surface. Sometimes you have to dig." Joel had taken 2 days off from his job at the logistics company where he worked. He suggested we start with what we could find without crossing any lines, public records, things that were legitimately accessible. He was careful about that. He said it twice. "We're not doing anything that isn't ours to do." We started with the law office in Dayton. It wasn't hard to find. Ohio Bar Association records are public. The firm was called Ashworth and Tremaine, and they specialized in family law, specifically divorce proceedings, estate disputes, and what the website listed almost as an afterthought, at the bottom of their practice areas, marriage dissolution for cases involving procedural irregularities. I didn't know what that meant yet. Joel did some more searching that evening. I sat next to him and watched the screen and drank the coffee he'd made me, even though I'd already had my daily limit and my hands were unsteady enough already. He found marriage records. Ohio keeps them going back decades, digitized and searchable through the county clerk's office. It took him about 20 minutes. Diane's maiden name was Hargrove. She told me she'd never been married before me. She'd told me that clearly more than once, including when we filled out our marriage license in 1989. Her name, Diane Louise Hargrove, appeared in the Cuyahoga County marriage records. The date, March 14, 1987. The husband's name, a man named Philip Schaefer. I read the name 3 times. I had never heard it in my life. Joel pulled up the divorce records next. Ohio divorce proceedings are also public record, filed with the Court of Common Pleas. We searched for Diane Hargrove Schaefer. We searched for Philip Schaefer. We searched every variation we could think of. There was nothing. No divorce filing. No dissolution of marriage. No legal termination of any kind. By the time we found that, it was close to 11 o'clock at night. The apartment was quiet. Joel had turned off the overhead light, and we were sitting in the glow of his laptop and a single lamp in the corner, and I thought about how many nights I'd sat in my own house thinking everything was in its right place, thinking I knew the shape of my own life. I said, "If she was never divorced, then your marriage might not be legally valid," Joel said quietly. "That's what I think the letters from the attorney were about." I need to stop here and tell you what that means, practically speaking, when you are 63 years old, and you have been married for 35 years, and you have a pension and a house with equity and a retirement account and a daughter who is 7 weeks from her wedding day. It means almost everything you thought you knew about your financial life is built on ground you never surveyed. I didn't sleep that night. Joel offered me his couch, and I took it. But I lay there staring at the ceiling and watching the headlights from passing cars move across the wall. I thought about Cora. I thought about how she was going to feel when she found out about Owen. I thought about how I was going to tell her. I thought about what kind of man I wanted to be in the next few weeks, because I knew, with the same certainty I know when a structure is sound, that what I did in the next few weeks was going to define the rest of my life. I did not think about revenge. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was not rage, it was grief. The specific grief of realizing that the person you have shared your bed with for 3.5 decades has been, in some essential way, a stranger. Joel drove me home the next morning. We didn't talk much on the way. When he pulled up in front of the house, he said, "What do you want to do, Dad?" And I told him I wasn't sure yet, but that I was going to need his help. He said, "Whatever you need," he said, "whatever you need, you know that." I knew that. I had always known that. Of all the things that had shifted and crumbled in the last 18 hours, Joel had not moved an inch. I thought about what it means to build a family, the choosing of it, the deliberate, sustained effort of it. And I thought that maybe that means more than I'd given it credit for. Diane was home when I came inside. She was in the living room, sitting in the chair by the window with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. She looked like she'd been waiting for me, arranging herself for a conversation she'd already rehearsed. She said she was sorry. She said it had only happened a few times. She said Owen had pursued her, which I noted but did not respond to. She said she had ended it, which I also noted. She said she loved me. She said she loved me. She said she hoped we could get past it. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "Diane, who is Philip Schaefer?" The teacup shifted in her hand, just slightly. But I've been watching structures for 40 years. I noticed the small movements. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I knew she wasn't going to pretend she didn't recognize the name. "That was a long time ago," she finally said. "How long ago?" "Before I met you." "Were you married to him?" Another pause. She looked out the window. "It was very brief. It wasn't a real marriage." "Was there a divorce?" She didn't answer. I said her name. She said, "It was complicated. The situation was complicated. I was 22. He left. He just left. I didn't have money for an attorney. I didn't know what to do." "So you married me anyway." She turned and looked at me, and I could see, for the first time, that she was genuinely afraid, not of me. I have never raised my hand to anyone in my life, and she knew that. Afraid of the weight of what was falling. "I thought it didn't matter," she said. "I thought he was just gone. I thought you could let it go and it would go away." She didn't say anything. I told her I needed time to think. I went to my office, this small room off the garage where I keep my drafting table and my files and the shelf of technical manuals I've been meaning to sort for 15 years. I closed the door. I called an attorney, not Ashworth and Tremaine and Dayton. I didn't want any connection to whoever Diane had been consulting. I called a family law attorney in Cleveland named Patricia Osei, who had been recommended to me by a colleague years ago for reasons I'd never imagined I would need. Patricia was direct and practical and did not waste words. She told me what I already half knew. If Diane's first marriage had never been legally dissolved, our marriage was potentially voidable under Ohio law. She told me this did not mean our 35 years were erased. It was more complicated than that, and there were protections, and we would need to understand what Philip Schaefer's current legal status was. She told me not to panic and not to do anything drastic. She told me to gather what documentation I had and come see her. I also called my financial advisor, a man named Roy Hutchings, who has been managing my retirement account since 2003 and who has never, in 22 years, said anything that alarmed me. He was alarmed, not at me, at the situation. He told me what I needed to know about protecting my assets in the short term and what steps to take immediately and what to document. I spent the afternoon writing things down. That evening, Joel came back over. I told him what Patricia Osei had said. He listened, and then he said something I didn't expect. What about Cora? I'd been thinking about Cora all day, about how to tell her about Owen. Because whatever happened was Diane and me. Cora still didn't know that the man she was going to marry had been in our kitchen with her mother's hands on his face. She needs to know, Joel said. Before the wedding, obviously before the wedding. I know, and it needs to come from you. He was right. He was 26 years old and he was right. I called Cora and asked if she could come over the following evening. I told her I needed to talk to her about something important and that she should come alone. She asked me if everything was okay, and I said it wasn't, but that I was. She arrived at 7. She still had her work clothes on. She's an occupational therapist, works with pediatric patients, always comes home looking like she gave everything she had that day. She came in and looked at my face and looked around for her mother and said, "Dad, what's going on?" I told her what I'd seen in the kitchen. I didn't minimize it. I told her plainly the same way I'd told Joel, because Cora deserved the same respect that Joel got. She is not a fragile person. She is also my daughter, and I watched her face change as I talked, and it cost me more than I can say to keep my voice steady. She didn't cry right away. She went very still, the way she goes still when she's managing something enormous and doesn't want to crack in front of someone she loves. "How long?" she said. "I don't know." "Does he know you know?" "He knows I saw them." He laughed. "I haven't spoken to him." She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Where's Mom?" "Upstairs." She nodded. She sat with that for a long moment. This young woman I've watched grow up from a little girl who made me push her on swings, and I could see her putting pieces together in her mind. I could see her re-examining things, the way you do when a context shifts, going back through memories and asking which ones were true. "There's more," I said. I told her about Philip Schaefer. I told her about the attorney's letters. I told her what Patricia Osei had explained. Cora has a practical mind. She's always been the one who asked the logistical questions, the "what does this mean in real terms" questions. She asked them now, carefully, and I answered as best I could. When I finished, she looked at me for a long moment, and she said, "So everything she told us, the story about her family, about her past, she just built it on top of something she buried. That's what it looks like. And Owen." She stopped. She pressed her lips together. "Owen was in our kitchen." "Yes." She stood up. She said she needed a few minutes. She walked out to the backyard, and I watched through the kitchen window as she stood on the deck in the cold, her arms crossed, looking out at the dark yard. She stood there a long time. When she came back in, she had decided something. I could see it in her face. Not hardness exactly, but resolution. The closing of a door. "I'm not marrying him," she said. "Okay. I need to be the one to tell him, not you, of course. And I'm going to need you to not do anything dramatic." I almost smiled at that. You know me. I know you, she said. I know you're not going to do anything dramatic. I just needed to say it out loud. She stayed for 2 more hours. We talked about logistics, about the deposits for the venue and the caterer, about what to tell people, about what she needed from me in the coming weeks. She was methodical about it, just the way Joel is methodical, and I thought, these two kids, whatever else they got from their parents or their circumstances, both learned how to hold something hard without dropping it. Before she left, she hugged me for a long time in the front doorway. She said, "I'm sorry this happened to you, Dad." I said I was sorry it happened to her. She said, "We're going to be okay." I believed her. The weeks that followed were among the most exhausting of my life, and also, in some strange way, among the clearest. There's a particular kind of clarity that comes when you stop maintaining a version of things that isn't true, when you stop holding the shape of something that has already changed. Owen called me once. I did not answer. He texted Cora approximately 40 times. She showed me some of them. I shouldn't have read them, but she offered, I think because she needed a witness, and they ranged from denial to explanation to apology to a kind of self-justification that told me everything I needed to know about who Owen Rafferty actually was. Cora answered twice. The second time was final. Diane moved to her sister's house in Columbus at the end of the month. That was her choice, and I didn't try to stop her. Patricia Unsee was working through the legal tangle of the first marriage. Philip Schaefer had, as it turned out, relocated to Arizona decades ago and remarried, which created its own complications, and the process was going to take time. Roy Hutchings helped me understand what was protected and what needed attention. I spent a lot of evenings in my office with documents spread across my drafting table, working through the practical arithmetic of a life that needed rebalancing. Joel came over twice a week. Sometimes he brought food. He's a better cook than I ever was, which used to embarrass me a little and now just makes me glad. We'd sit at the kitchen table and eat and talk about ordinary things. His job. A book he was reading. The state of the gutters, which we'd never fully sorted. He has the patience of someone who learned early that love is not something that simply arrives. It's something you tend. One evening in early December, about 6 weeks after everything had come apart, I was sitting on the back deck in the cold, the same deck where Cora had stood the night I told her, and Joel came out and handed me a cup of coffee I wasn't supposed to have and sat down in the other chair. "How are you actually doing?" he said. I thought about it. I didn't want to give him a version of an answer. He'd earned the real one. "I feel like I've been living in a house that was built on drawings I never got to check," I said. "And I keep finding things that were put in wrong, and I have to decide whether to gut it down to the studs or try to repair as I go." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What would you do with an actual building?" "Depends on the foundation." "What's the foundation?" I looked at him. This young man who had lined up his toy cars in rows and grown into someone who asked good questions and showed up and told me the truth when I needed it. "You," I said. "Cora. A few things I built that are actually solid." He nodded. He didn't say anything sentimental, which is not his style and is, I think, one of the things I love most about him. By January, Cora had canceled all the wedding arrangements. The venue was partially refundable, the caterer was not. She handled all of it herself firmly and without drama, and when people asked, neighbors, co-workers, the extended family network that orbits these events, she gave them a short, clear answer that didn't leave room for follow-up questions. She is 31 years old, and she knows how to close a door. She started therapy in February, which I encouraged and which she'd already decided on herself. She said it was helping. She said she felt like she was sorting through a storage unit she hadn't opened in years. Some of it was junk she'd been meaning to throw out anyway. Some of it was things she'd forgotten she had. I started seeing Patricia Osei regularly as the legal situation with Diane moved forward. It was not fast. Ohio family law is not designed for speed, but it was moving, and Roy Hutchings had helped me get my financial footing sorted into something that felt stable, and I had learned to sleep again, mostly. The hardest part, I want to be honest about this, because I think people underestimate it, was not the anger. Anger was manageable. The hardest part was the revision. Going back through 35 years and understanding that certain things I had accepted as simply true. The story of who Diane was before I knew her. The foundation she told me we were building on had been edited. She had handed me a version of her history with whole chapters removed, and I had built my understanding of our marriage on top of those gaps without knowing the gaps were there. I don't believe she set out to ruin me. I don't think it was calculated in that way. I think she was a 22-year-old girl who made a bad decision, and then a worse one, and then kept choosing the easier path every time the harder one appeared. I understand that impulse. I am not without my own regrets, but there is a difference between a mistake you admit and one you bury, and the thing you bury will find its way out eventually. In my experience, always at the worst possible moment. Spring came early that year. The kind of Ohio spring that makes you forget you ever doubted it would arrive. Joel came over on a Saturday in late March, and we finally finished the gutter project, properly this time, with new hardware and a level and everything secured the way it should be. And Cara came over in the afternoon with lunch from the deli on Elm Street. She knows I like. We sat on the back deck, the three of us, and ate and talked, and the yard was full of the loud returning birds that always made me feel, without knowing exactly why, that things were going to continue. Cora had started seeing someone, a man she'd met through a colleague, quiet and steady seeming, who she was taking slowly and thoughtfully. She mentioned him the way she mentions things she isn't ready to jinx yet. Briefly, carefully, with just enough information to be honest. I didn't push. I told her I was glad Joel had gotten a promotion. He talked about it the same way, briefly, without fanfare, as if he'd just finished checking something off a list. I told him I was proud of him. He said, "Thanks, Dad," and handed me another piece of bread from the bag like the moment was ordinary. It was ordinary, that's the thing. Ordinary in a way that felt, after the months we'd come through, like something close to grace. I thought about what Cora had said the night I'd told her everything. We're going to be okay. I had believed her then on some level, the level that needed to believe it to keep moving. But sitting there in the March sunlight with my son and my daughter and a deli sandwich and the sound of the birds coming back, I believed it in a different way. Not as a promise I was holding on to, as something I could see in front of me. There are things I know now that I didn't know a year ago. I know that a family can be exactly what you choose it to be, and that choice, repeated over years and decades in small, ordinary Saturday afternoons, is its own kind of bedrock. I know that the people who stay when things fall apart are the architecture you actually live in, not the one you drew on paper at the beginning. I know that 63 is not too old to rebuild. It is not too old to survey the foundation, identify what's compromised, and do the work. I've been a civil engineer my whole career. I've spent 40 years understanding how things hold together and what makes them fail. The most important thing I ever learned is this: a structure doesn't have to be perfect to be sound. It has to be honest. Every load has to be carried by something real, not something assumed. Every joint has to do what it claims to do. I'm still working on the house. The legal process moves at its own pace, and I've made my peace with that. I have a good attorney and a steady financial advisor and a son who brings me food I didn't ask for, and a daughter who closes doors cleanly and opens windows just as deliberately. It's enough. More than enough. Some mornings I still do my walk. Past the Hendersons' broken mailbox. Past the park. Past the 7-Eleven. I still sometimes stop for the coffee I'm not supposed to have. The knees better. The sky has been mostly clear. I am, for the first time in a long time, not holding the shape of something that isn't true. That is worth more than I know how to say. I've thought a lot about what Diane must have told herself all those years, that it didn't matter, that it was so long ago it had effectively ceased to exist, that a decision made by a frightened 22-year-old didn't have to follow a 60-year-old woman into her kitchen on a Tuesday morning. But things don't work that way. I know that now with a certainty I couldn't have articulated before all of this happened. A choice doesn't dissolve just because you stop looking at it. It sits where you left it, patient, waiting for the moment when the light finally reaches it. And the longer you leave it in the dark, the more it costs you when it finally surfaces. Not just you, but everyone who trusted you enough to build something alongside you. That's the part that I keep coming back to. Not the anger, which faded faster than I expected. Not even the grief, though that took longer. It's the cost. Diane's choice to bury that first marriage didn't only affect her. It reached forward across 35 years and landed on Cara's wedding plans, on Joel's quiet evenings spent noticing things he couldn't quite name, on my retirement accounts, on the house we thought we owned together. One decision, unmade and unacknowledged, spreading outward like a crack in a load-bearing wall. I'm a civil engineer. I spent 40 years working with the principle that a structure has to be honest about what it's carrying. Every joint, every beam, every foundation has to do exactly what it claims to do, not approximately, not most of the time, but consistently and truthfully. When something is compromised, you don't cover it up and hope for the best. You find it, you name it, and you fix it properly, because the longer a compromised structure is left, oh wait, it was never designed to carry. The worse the failure when it finally comes. People are not so different. What I find myself wanting to say, not as a lecture because I have no standing to lecture anyone, is simply this. The truth you're avoiding is not getting lighter. It is getting heavier, and the people around you, the ones who love you and trust you and are building their lives in proximity to yours, they are carrying that weight too without knowing it. Joel knew something was wrong for 6 months before he understood what it was. He couldn't name it, but he felt it. Kids always do. Partners usually do. Somewhere underneath the ordinary rhythm of a shared life. We absorb what we're near. The intelligence it took for Joel to notice, to pay attention without jumping to conclusions, to bring me what he'd found carefully and without drama, that came from somewhere in him that had nothing to do with blood. It came from years of choosing to show up, of deciding that this family was worth his full attention and honesty. That is the kind of mind I want to cultivate in myself. Not cleverness, not suspicion, just the willingness to see clearly, even when seeing clearly is uncomfortable. And Cora, the way she stood in that cold backyard and made her decision and came back in with her face set, that took something I can only call character. Not the absence of pain, but the refusal to let pain make the decision for her. I'm rebuilding, slowly, methodically, the way I know how to rebuild things. There are mornings when the house feels very quiet, and I don't entirely know what to do with that quiet. But there are also Saturday afternoons on the back deck with Joel and Cora and a bag of bread from the deli, and the birds are back and the gutters are finally fixed right. That's real. That's load-bearing. That holds. Whatever we bury doesn't disappear, but what we build, honestly, with people who choose to stay, that holds.